Good morning, everyone. We'll now move towards our next segment of the conference, which is the series of In Conversations. In these In Conversation sessions, our guest speaker and the faculty moderator will engage in a dialogue on a given theme of inclusivity. Our first In Conversation is on gender inclusivity, combating gender stereotypes. Our first guest for the day is Mr. Harish Sadani, who will be speaking on gender inclusivity. I take this opportunity of introducing Mr. Harish Sadani. Mr. Sadani has been passionately running multi-sector developmental programs on gender and health for over 3 decades. Sir is a leading gender rights activist who has pioneered efforts in India in 1993 as the co-founder and executive director of Men Against Violence and Abuse MAVA, where he works with young men and boys to prevent violence on women. Sir has done his master's in social work from the Tata Institute of Social Sciences and has been engaging and mentoring thousands of adolescent boys and young men across India to communicate with peers in healthy relationships, masculinity, and sexuality related matters, using out of the box methods, interactive workshops, cultural magazines, street theatre, and traveling film festivals. He is a fellow with the Aspen's US International New Voices program. Currently, he is also a consultant and trainer to corporates, universities, colleges, and NGOs across India on prevention of sexual harassment at workplace and other gender matters. Sir is also a TEDx speaker and has been invited by national and international bodies like UN Women and UNFPA to share insights and build capacities of various stakeholders on addressing issues of gender-based and sexual violence against women. In recognition of his pioneering and significant work, Sir has been awarded with the Ashoka Changemakers Award QS 2010, Maharashtra Foundation Award 2011, the Mukta Sanman Award 2014 by IBN Lokmit News channel of the CNN Group, and the Sanvik India Diversity Award 2017 by Sanvik Asia Private Limited. It is an honor to have you here, sir. I'd also like to take this opportunity to introduce our topic for today. Inclusivity in its very definition means to be open to everyone and not limited to certain people. Gender inclusivity is a concept that transcends equality. It is a notion that any kind of work and all the opportunities are open to everyone irrespective of their gender. It states that male and female stereotypes do not define societal roles and expectations. It promotes a vision for a future where women and men, regardless of socioeconomic status, have the same rights and opportunities to access finance and assets, establish and lead businesses, participate in decision-making processes affecting their lives, and have equal and safe access to public services. Gender stereotyping presents a serious obstacle to the achievement of real gender equality and feeds into gender discrimination. Thank you. Now I call upon our moderator, Dr. Kavita Rai, and our speaker, Mr. Harish Sadani, to take over the session. Please note that the questions will be taken up in the last 10 minutes of the conversation. Please use the chat box for all your questions. Over to you, Kavita ma'am and Harish sir.
Thank you so much, Rachna. Can we spotlight, sir? Good morning, sir. Once again, I take this opportunity to welcome you. It's an absolute honor and pleasure for me to be in conversation with you. Thank you, sir. So yours is, as Rachna also mentioned, yours is the first organization of men which is working since 1993 towards women empowerment and to prevent gender-based violence on girls and women, especially by engaging men. That's the innovative approach you have taken. So what inspired you?
Am I audible? Because I think I've lost you.
With our mic is not working, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Maybe if you can remove the. We can't hear you.
No, ma'am, still not audible.
No, ma'am, you're still not audible.
Still, there's some technical glitch from the teams.
Or maybe you can rejoin.
audible now?
Yes, ma'am, you're
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much. So once again, I take this opportunity to welcome you, sir. I hope I'm audible now. I just mentioned
yeah,
that.
yeah.
So it's an immense pleasure for me to be in conversation with you. So as we mentioned in the introduction also, yours being the first organization of men which is working since 1993 towards women empowerment and to prevent gender-based violence on girls and women by engaging men and boys. So what inspired you to take this innovative approach to address gender issues? Can you share that with us?
So, yeah. So, as you rightly said, that our organization is a pioneering organization. Like, we pioneered in this space of gender and masculinity. So, very interestingly, our organization has a genesis that is, so appealing. It was in 1991 when a journalist by the name C.Y. Gopinath, who was writing a newspaper column in the Indian Express daily, that he wrote an article on domestic violence. And through that article, in that he gave a box item ad, a sort of an appeal. The words were like this: wanted men who believe that wives are not for battering, and if you are a man wanting to stop or prevent violence against women, please write to box number so and so. Now, it was unimaginable for the team that some 205 men responded to that appeal, including me. And I was the only one, a trained social worker who had done my master's from the Tata Institute and had my own understanding and vision on the subject. So, it was these 205 men, from which some 30 men who were from Bombay, different age groups, different backgrounds. We met consistently for a year, after the C.Y. Gopinath brought us together, because all these were letter writers. They had written letters and not knowing each other. And in those days, it was postcards through which
Mhm.
we had communicated. So, in the history, it was historical that a small ad gave birth to this organization. And in I would say on 11th of
Ma-
March 1993, that we came into existence, and each one had their own motivations. So I had motivations of my roots. When I was a child, I was doing a lot of household chores along with my paternal aunts, and I remember that I was teased by my neighbors and even friends that I'm a sissy, I'm a girlish. And I remember very clearly that even as a child, I did not took those taunts personally, but rather I used to reflect that if they're calling me like a girl, I am, which means that girls are secondary, having a status in the society, that it is unimportant, and men are the priority. So at a very younger age, I was questioning the gender stereotypes. And very interestingly, that as I was growing up and going to a college, I was watching the films of late actress Smita Patil, the well-known actress par excellence, in the Asian film world. So she had made a name by, redefining the roles of the Indian woman on the celluloid. And I was quite inspired by her portrayals, and it just happened that I happened to wish her on her birthday, which coincidentally falls in this month. So
Okay.
I wrote a letter to her wishing, and thereafter started an unusual pen friendship between her and me, wherein I used to write specific questions, asking her viewpoint on several gender related matters. And through that, my sensitivity on these issues grew up. So these two were there. And then interestingly, the third factor in me was that while I was doing my master's in social work, I used to volunteer with a women's organization, for getting exposure as to how the organization provides counseling to needy women. And I found that in those days, in 1991, when the situation was incorrigible, when men were not responding in cases where counseling was provided to a distressed woman, there were some reactions by that NGO where I was volunteering, that they used to have a sit-in dharna or demonstration outside the home of the man, and I used to feel disturbed. Is that a kind of a solution? And does it help the distressed woman also in any way by ostracizing the man and his family? On the contrary, it would cause more harm to
True.
her. And that made me trigger, that unless and until you work with men, and because it's very interesting that I have been saying that men are seen as part of the problem, and their attitudes are rightfully a part of the problem. So how can you think of a solution without them playing an important role in addressing? So that and in the last almost several years, 40, 50 years, all those who are working on gender have concentrated their efforts on working with women and girls,
Mm.
and that has a very good impact over the years. But what has happened, while women have become more awakened and assertive about their rights, on the other side, men are feeling more and more threatened and insecure, you know. So unless and until you address them, engage them into the conversation, then only you are able to address the root cause, and that's the story of Mava.
Completely agree, sir. Yeah. So, do you believe that it is the patriarchal mindset which is deep rooted in our society is the main reason behind discrimination against women? And can we say that redefining masculinity and would help us address this to achieve gender equality? Do you think so?
Definitely, definitely. So, when we say patriarchy, it, refers to a systemic framework, a structural framework that gives importance to men, sees them as superior, and all the subsystems of our society, whether it is family, religion, education, governance, or even media, you know, they all give importance and impetus to men, and,
Mhm.
and put sanctions and restrictions on women and other gendered people. So, you find that patriarchy grants certain privileges to men,
Mhm.
benefits, vis-a-vis the other genders. And, there is a phrase I always say that, it provides the entitlement to power and privilege. So, entitlement, the moment a baby boy is born in an Indian society, he is entitled to the privileges, irrespective of whether he uses it or not. The very fact that he is born, he gets certain advantages, certain special status vis-a-vis the other gender. So, this whole system which has been there, the male dominated system, जो हम बोलते हैं पुरुष प्रधानता या पितृ सत्ता पे आधारित. So, when you say patriarchy, it's basically the transfer of power happening from one man to another man, and from that other man also to another man. So a system which keeps this intact, is at the roots of the problem, the patriarchal, and, if there are institutions like religion, which are more than 5,000 years old, if you say Hinduism, so that
Mhm.
means over these so many centuries and years, the ideas about what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman have been passed on for generations. So therefore, unless, we challenge patriarchal norms, we are not going to move ahead. So, the others will be a short-term gain. But, and as you rightly said, so therefore the mindset, and, largely the mindset of men is what we need to change. And for that, a conscious, concerted effort to work closely with men and boys, is much needed. And especially in the light of so many incidents of violence against women, which you see rising cases,
Mhm.
you find that, people are resorting to strictest punishment on the one side. The more stricter the punishment, people think that will be better, but on the contrary, it has shown that death penalty and all has not deterred people from the crimes, especially on women. So it's a humane approach, and also closely working with men in the process of transformation. So the gender transformative agenda is sorely missing, among many stakeholders.
Okay. So do you think even men suffer because of thick, or would you like to tell us about, I mean, one of the papers I have read, you mentioned about toxic masculinity. I mean, what do you mean by that?
Yeah. So in fact, when we say masculinity, we must realize that masculinity is also not a unitary construct. It is also shaped by different factors in society. It is not a homogeneous concept. There are kinds and kinds of men, but nonetheless, it's the dominant model of masculinity, or what you call as hegemonic, that is being reinforced, by all the subsystems. And we have seen over the years that this kind of masculinity, which in a way is a toxic form of
Mhm.
masculinity, also the dominant form, it this kind of masculine behavior, it doesn't even harm only the woman, but it also harms the men and boys also, in many ways. For example, men are have to perform certain roles. The society expects men that men should be provider, protector, always a winner and achiever. So what happens if men who are not able to adhere to these
Perform.
expectations? So, for example, suppressing of emotions is seen as an important marker among masculinity. So, what happens if men, apart from just crying, expressing emotions as they are, and also in a way sometimes expressing their vulnerability, is seen as something wrong, and which men should not exhibit. Now, if
Generally, we
you
say,
suppress,
लड़कियों की तरह मत रहो.
yeah, I mean, correct. And मर्द को कभी दर्द नहीं होता, dialogues like that, have been so popular that, people don't realize that such kind of toxic behavior also impacts men in the long run. The emotional growth, emotional intelligence. Always people talk about IQ, but EQ is something which is hampered. If you work towards emotional intelligence, then you'll realize that men themselves need that spaces where they can reflect, and contribute towards a gender equal society. So you're very right that that the impact of all behaviors which are harmful to not just women, but also equally impacting men. You find the number of suicides, for example, on the rise. If you see the National Crime Records Bureau data, which have been just released recently, so you will find that the number of men's suicide is 4 times higher than that of women. Now, people may argue that there are several reasons, but one among the chief reason is men's inability to accept no, men unable to accept rejection or failures at work, in relationships, and so on. So it's important that men realize, take a pause, and see that such kind of behavior is in a way harming him, and apart from his own well-being, and the well-being of the family, and the well-being overall of the society, in a way, is being impacted. So definitely, when we talk this phrase toxic masculinity, we have to see it from the micro to the macro level. What are the ramifications?
Thank you, sir. So, as you mentioned that we need to take concerted efforts by engaging men. So, how does your organization engage men and discourse on gender?
So, as we have to work at two levels. One is, I would say, at a curative level, that is after incidents of violence have happened, where you provide one-to-one counseling, group counseling, and guidance, individualized support to needy men, distressed men, apart from women and girls. So we do that, providing of counseling and all, but our major thrust of all our programs has been on prevention. And when I say prevention, it's largely young men of 18 to 25 and adolescent boys of 13 to 18, is with whom we work largely, pan India. So what we do is, we try to engage the young men and boys in a series of participatory exercises and workshops wherein they will contribute their thoughts and ideas, and in that process they do what is called unlearning,
Mhm.
relearning. Because whatever they have up till now, ideas about manhood, the ideas about equality, power, they need to relook at those. And in that process I find they are interrogating the dominant model of masculinity. And when I say that such model of masculinity shouldn't be there, then what is the alternative? So they are encouraged to look into and take up active stands for the women in their lives. For example, some 700 plus mentors shaped by me, in a span of last 13 years, they have reached out to over 4 lakh other young men in the community, to their peers, the same age group, other young men. And they are doing it in a wide range of ways. They are having community engagement programs through street theater, through workshops, through folk media, and even through social media. So, these are the youth friendly medium. Now, for example, theater is such a powerful way, and
Yes.
street theater, where you encapsulate your message in a 15-minute play performed at a time for even 100 plus people. So, the more you have shows of such plays for different groups across the city, you are able to reach and have a dialogue with a multi audience, youth audience. So that's how I've been encouraging and mentoring, so mentoring is our major flagship program. And now I'm heartened to tell you that, last year we started an initiative called Manush, where we have spread beyond Maharashtra, and in Assam, Gujarat, and Karnataka. We are running this gender sensitization and mentoring program to cover new groups of young men, and with whom we'll work intensely. So these would be our critical mass, with whom we are going to work long term.
So, could you share an instance where men played an active role in gender inclusivity?
So,
Any of the past
one of
experiences?
one of our important aspects of Mawa's work is when men take up active stands for the women in our lives. And when we say active stands, like for example, I have shaped these 700 plus young boys I mentioned. So there are young. There was a young man, I would say, in rural Pune, where who was studying in a college, and he was part of my mentoring program. But this guy found that at his home he had an elderly sister. So there were the rituals of having a boy coming at his home, and meeting the sister with the idea of a match. But the sister was taken aback because she wasn't informed by the parents that today so and so guy will come to see you. Now, as a differently thinking brother, this guy Ganesh decided that I must intervene and take a stand. So, he had a dialogue with his parents and asked, whose marriage are we talking? And then they said, it is your sister. So he asked that, have you asked her? It's about her marriage. And when the sister clearly told that I'm really not interested, he ensured that, henceforth no such proposals are being looked into of men, for his sister. And when actually after 1 or 2 years, when the sister was really interested, this younger brother ensured that if whatever names the sister shortlists for consideration of groom, then this boy ensured that his sister and the would-be boy meet at least 4 or 5 times at public places, try to understand each other, and then after she's convinced, then she can really give her viewpoint that she's interested or not. So I think as a differently thinking brother, normally what used to happen, you find brothers are made to control the mobility of their sisters, where they are going, how they are going. And there are such many such case studies. I would say Ganesh's is one such story. And one another medium which I've been popularizing is the medium of a film festival. So, a very first of its kind, a 2-day film festival is what I've been organizing. And this festival showcases different films on all the genders and their intersectionality. So, we had a very lovely keynote address by Justice Shah today. And, we tried to cover uh, people of different sexuality and gender as a spectrum, as he referred to. So, I try to showcase different films so that, the assembled crowd of young men and women, and also people of other genders, they are able to watch some meaningful, impactful films and at the same time interact. So we have a section of people, gender rights activists, filmmakers interfacing with those youth. And therefore, this festival is first of its kind. And I'm so glad that, across the length and breadth of the country, we have had so far 3 editions of this traveling film festival, which I call it as Samabha. And I'm now right now working on my 4th edition. So far we have covered over some 22 cities pan India and some 12 districts of Maharashtra. Different institutions, colleges, universities have collaborated, for this. And I find a large number of youth are getting stirred and into conversations, which were seen as taboo kind of topics. So I would
So
say
true.
that at such forums, there are many such cases of young men opening up, talking up their innermost thoughts, and you need to give spaces, safe spaces for youngsters to talk about these matters that affect them also in the long run.
So, what made you choose this word Samabhav as you mentioned for the film festival? What does it signify?
So Samabhav means equanimity, the literal
Okay.
meaning. And so therefore, when we say Samabhav, means, it derived from the Hindi Marathi word Linga Bhav, which means gender. So
Okay.
Samabhav means same bhav se savi gender ko dekhna, like,
Okay.
so with
Got the
due
point.
respect and, to all the genders and recognizing their individuality, you know.
That's the objective.
Yeah.
So, what are your ideas on gender inclusivity and which are the areas, according to you, still needs to be addressed?
So, when we talk about inclusivity, you find that, many corporates in India, for example, have a separate wing on inclusivity and diversity. D&I, diversity and inclusion, is a separate kind of a wing opened by many corporates. And, people are trying to crystallize their ideas with the idea that, non-binary individuals, LGBTQI, queer individuals, their rights are protected at the workplace. So I would say that is definitely required. But when my idea of inclusivity is ensure that all those who have been excluded, are given an opportunity to present themselves, represent themselves, at all fora. So their voices should be heard. And even if they have a different opinion, that opinion should be respected. So you find firstly, the representation of women. itself is not to the level, you find now the Indian Companies Act telling that the board of directors should have a certain number of women. But often it is just like a tick box, a sort of compliance that some organizations are doing. But proactively ensuring that women are at the top ladder, including the board, one is that. And one important aspect I would say of inclusivity is, when a person like me working with largely heterosexual men and boys, you know,
Mhm.
engaging them into conversations, so even say, for example, there's a law, sexual harassment at workplace. Now, one part is implementation of the law and having a redressal mechanism in place. One is ensuring that, but at the same time, how would you have the participation of male employees, top male management? So the law in a way gives us that opportunity to have enlightened top management, including male managers and directors, to ensure that there is a policy of engaging male employees also.
Mhm.
I find this is a something which is missing at a wider level. So I would see that more and more corporates and institutions, educational institutions, apart from including other gendered people, including sexual minorities, including women and others, they should also include differently thinking, sensitive men in their various committees and in their various plan of action.
So now we move on to our next question, sir, the last one before we move on to question and answers round. So what do you think about the existing legislations for protecting women rights? Are they adequate, or what needs to be done? I mean, since you're working for women empowerment since long, what is your experience about it?
So, we must firstly understand, especially the gathered students here, that, the legislation for the protection of rights of women and even other minorities have not come because a group of legislators in the parliament felt that such laws should be enacted. It didn't come on their own, that through their own volition that they went through and passed these laws. It is thanks to the efforts of so many people in the movement, in the women's liberation movement, in the movement for gender equality, that there are several activists and workers who have contributed to the drafting of many laws. So for example, the PCPNDT Act, Preconception and Prenatal Diagnostic Techniques Act, has come out with a lot of battle, a lot of journey, when at such a time, when it was not seen that sex selection is happening in a country like India, where, women are worshipped either as devis, so people were unbelieving, including the government of India, when the issue had just come to rise that in places like Punjab and Haryana, the son preference was at its high. And you had on trucks and buses the messages, abhi itne paise do or itne bachao, bachao paise for the dowry of the girl, as if she's a burden. So there were subtle messages which were there talking about male preference, and thereafter, when illegally how abortions were happening, across the country. So a large number of women's groups, their efforts have gone. We had the Dowry Prohibition Act, where, but in reality, you find such a very good piece of legislation. It has been there, but hardly, I would say, even 15 to 20 cases pan India have been filed, which
Mhm.
means that giving dowry and receiving dowry is still legit, in a way, encouraged at all strata of the
Mhm.
society. So unless the social mores, unless the empathy and understanding of the lay public, and seeing these as evils, dowry as evil, unless that happened, you
Even
have had,
child marriage for that matter, so isn't it?
correct. So
Still
it
during
remains
pandemic, the cases
largely,
have risen so much because of it.
You're right. So in the last 2 years, you have seen that many girls have been forcibly married because of poverty, because of
Mm.
several other factors, So I think, unless we address these social issues along with, apart from a very good piece of legislation, I mentioned about the PCPNDT Act, then there is a domestic violence law, and we have sexual harassment at workplace law. So these two are among the finest piece of legislations in India. But what we lack is a strict implementation policy, wherein all the stakeholders are doing their bit. They are contributing wholeheartedly. So you find, for example, among corporates and organizations across the country, the sexual harassment committees are still not constituted, and even if they are
Mhm.
constituted, the awareness workshops, which are mandatory, you know are not being organized, despite 2013 is when that law came. So you find that more than 8 years hence, we have to still, talk about. So, somewhere I find conversations, which should be especially among the youth, when it comes to gender matters, I find that should be encouraged by, educational institutions, by parents, by, people in different spaces. So I find, unless that happens, the law will definitely be an important tool in bringing out that change, what we have been looking, the change in the status of women uh, will happen, but there should be, along with that, sustained efforts of the civil society bodies, and
Mhm.
I think that is something, and especially, as I was telling, addressing men, so you need to provide, so in our day-to-day conversations at home, on the dining table, for example,
True.
how much of us try to engage the men in our lives, ask them their viewpoint on certain happenings in society, unless they are also able to relate and brought into conversation, that what is their thoughts, what are their mindset, on the contemporary happenings. So I think that has to be, encouraged at a wider level, which is sorely missing.
True, sir. Completely agree. I mean, it starts at home, and we have seen some advertisements also coming up portraying, inclusive atmosphere wherein the mother is telling the boy, even you can run the washing machine with the detergent ad. They are saying even you can do it. Even Cadbury ad showing gender reversal. So now I think we are moving
This is the
towards an
story.
arena for inclusive atmosphere, environment, as we say, for gender inclusivity. So can we move on to question and answers?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sure.
Yash, request you to please take questions from the
Yeah.
chat box. I mean, the chat box is flooded with so many questions, so
Oh, let me
I'm
see.
sure you would love to address them.
Thank you, Dr. Kavita, ma'am. What a wonderful insight of knowledge on the topic is being shared by you, sir. We will now move on to our Q&A round. First question is being posted by Ms. Apurva Thakur. She has asked, what are the top three suggestions to make on educational institution related to gender inclusive?
So, sir, what was the question? Can you repeat? What are the top?
Uh, sh- Sure, sir. Our first question is being posted by Ms. Apurva Thakur. She is asking about the top three suggestions to make on educational institution to make it gender inclusive.
Yeah, so one is, there should be periodic exercises, sessions, workshops, on gender related themes, where you cover all the spectrum of gender. You invite people so that there is a dialogue happening, so in the absence of any communication, and especially, topics like sexual freedom, which, today we heard from learned speaker, Justice Shah, that, unless these topics are brought out in the open, so I find that, unless spaces are provided where, we talk about the roots of the problem, where we talk about these topics that are seen as taboo topics, unless that silence surrounding the violence, silence which is surrounding all these issues of gender and sexuality, that has to be broken. So I would say concretely three steps, if you would say that one is the educational system, wherein there are spaces for men and all gendered people to talk about their innermost thoughts and ideas, exchange of ideas, experiences inside. The second, I would say, youth friendly media should be used so that a large number of youth are in the conversation. So you find nowadays on social media newer and newer forms of short videos and campaign material, as I think the faculty mentioned about the Cadbury ad, which is changed. You had few years ago, I think 1 year ago, we had the advertisement about masculinity by a big ad company, which was into shaving blades, and they came up with a new campaign that a thinking man, a caring man is something which we have to be nurturing and having examples of that. uh, shall we move to the next? Yeah.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, for answering the question. Our next question is being posted by Siddhi Deshmukh. She is asking, although we have laws and acts that safeguard women and their rights, we still find severe cases of violence against them. The society still sees women through the stereotypical lens. What, according to you, would be effective to change this? She has also posted a second question along with it. Also, do you believe that the educational system and the textbooks need to be changed, the narrative of the woman that the portrait would be helped?
So the first part, I did not get specifically what was the question in that. I got the second question right, but uh, I'll just, who
So
was the
she,
person?
Yash, can you please repeat
Siddhi
the first
Deshmukh.
question slowly, please?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, ma'am. So she was asking whether there are many laws, there are many rights for the women, but still we can find severe cases against them, and the society even see the women with stereotypical lens. So, what, according to you, would be effective to change this?
So, basically over the years, all our subsystems of society, whether it is, I was talking about, whether it's a family, whether it's religion, whether it's education, governance, media, all they have been giving a preferential status to men and a secondary status to women. So you will find that, either woman is portrayed as a secondary being or as a sexual being, you know whether it's in advertisements or even a newspaper. Typical, if you see how many news are related to women, you will find that there are 15 to 20% coverage of news item related to women. But again, what are those kinds of news? They are either atrocities, violence on women, those kind of stories, or a woman shown as a sexual being in advertisements. So that is the kind of coverage. You'll find achievements of women, just as achievements of men are highlighted the way. For example, sportswomen, recently in the Olympics and all, we have seen that how women, if given the opportunities, can also, shine and bring laurels to the country. So I think it's the opportunity and representation somewhere which has been missing. So if, as you said rightly, the stereotypical ideas about being a woman, if those are to be challenged not just by women, but by all strata of society, by all sections of society, will have to bring to fore that a woman also is a multi-dimensional, multifaceted person, and uh, the typical qualities, we have to tell that on the other side, there are men also who are sensitive, caring, nurturing, fathers, So I think we'll have to have a balance. When you talk about women, you have to also see how men are portrayed, and similarly other genders.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. So we are moving on to the next question. This is asked by Ms. Nawaz. She is asking that, do you think that the government and bureaucracy needs gender sensitization. Recently, a Madras High Court judge commented how he needs to educate himself more on LGBTQ matters before delivering the judgments on the same. Is there a lack of empathy on the part of the legislators?
Yeah, so I would say your suggestion is very important, because gender sensitization is required for all different sections of society, for all the stakeholders, so including the government and bureaucracy. So you'll find that because all of them are have been carrying notions, the ideas about being a man and woman over the years, whatever they have seen in the prism of the largely society which is largely male dominated. So I think it's important that, but I find that often these programs are limited to seeing them as law enforcement agencies, that they are supposed to maintain law and order and uh, you know follow the laws in practice. But beyond that, when you have men in uniform, for example, as policemen, you have to address them at an individual level. What are their thoughts and ideas about masculinity? Unfortunately, in the training that is being imparted to them, this kind of relational dialogue, where they are able to relate to these matters in their personal and professional life, that kind of spaces where they can reflect on these issues, reflect on their own behavior, I think those are lacking at the moment. So if at all training must be happening, it's about information about the law and how they should be, as law enforcing machinery, doing their professional role. But I think at an individual level, unless they are able to connect with these issues, and the participants are able to have actual stands on these issues, individual stands, then only somewhere you'll find that there is shaken of the bureaucracy happening.
Yes, sir. So thank you, sir. We are now moving on to the next question. It has been asked by Harshita Tyagi. She is asking that, sir, what is sex is to nature, gender is to culture. Do you see a culture reformation taking place right now or in the near future?
So, this kind of cultural shifts, cultural transformation is the need of the day, because, as per the growing times, the social mores of the society, you will have to move along with, So you find, unfortunately, what is happening, that many of these social issues, including issues on gender and sexuality, as we saw earlier in the keynote address, public morality versus constitutional morality. So, still the ideas about, for example, in our Indian society, ideas about virginity and purity are so attached to a woman, that, a woman's own mind, what she thinks, her autonomy, is somewhere less considered and talked about, uh, you know, uh, in the process. Uh, just give me 1 minute.
Sure, sir.
I'll just join. One minute.
Sure, sir.
So, a cultural transformation is definitely the need of the day, because you need to have shift in the mindset. The traditional ideas about being a man or a woman have to be questioned, have to be challenged. And you find that people with years and years of ideas that are traditional and that are not modern, uh, have to be challenged, and therefore the work largely is to be among young population, youth. You'll have to have, so that cultural shift, you cannot wait for it to happen in the near future, but you have to invest now, today. You have to have the action today, So the cultural shift should happen, as soon as possible. And for that, you need to have engagements, community engagements of minds, uh, you know, uh, to be happening.
I agree with your wise words, sir. Thank you, sir. Now we will move on to our next question. It has been asked by Ms. Apurva Thakur. She's asking that domestic workers in India are often the sole earners of the family, but are still subjected to domestic violence and seek validation in terms of marriage or men. What are some actionable steps that we can take to address that?
So, in India, earlier we talked about the Domestic Violence Prevention of Women from Domestic Violence Act. Now, this act is primarily, uh, we might think that it is for married women, but in fact, it's a very broader, comprehensive law which includes even unmarried other women and girls. And this also has a provision of domestic workers. So in the sense, like, if they are subjected to any form of harassment or abuse, there are different machinery. So uh, there are a set of mechanisms in place. I would say not just the Domestic Violence Act, but also the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Act, which includes domestic workers also under the ambit. So there is something called local committee, if not an internal committee within the organization, but it's a local committee which is constituted by the collector of the city. Under that local committee, anyone can send a complaint, and you find that the local committee is at the city level, at the suburban level, headed by an eminent woman who has worked on the subject. And so therefore people can put in their complaints, if even if it is about domestic help. So there is very much a law with provisions that takes into account what Apurva has sought, but more importantly, it's the individual civil society action which will really matter. So unless people have more awareness about this law, and that there is a provision of domestic help also covered under it, then only we will be able to actually put into practice.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Next question is being posted by Ms. Rachna Verma. She's asking, like, you were invited abroad to study a notable work done on gender issues in US. Did you find any difference in the issues or problems?
So, I had the opportunity to visit different institutions in the US, thanks to an invitation by the US Department of State, some few years ago. And when I visited a few of the cities of US, I found that there are some very interesting experiments and efforts put in by the civil society bodies there, by the government there, to ensure that issues like domestic violence are addressed. For example, the shelter homes, which are there, to protect distressed women, are in a very good state and with all the facilities to ensure that, the woman's dignity is maintained and preserved. So I find there are definitely a high level of awareness and proactive involvement of the civil society. But nonetheless, there are certain things. For example, I noticed that, while sexuality education, might be imparted in many schools abroad, it's not there in a country like India. Many of the growing up boys and girls are still deprived of that kind of education. But even if in the West and including in the US, there may be sexuality education, but the boards who are governing these educational department have a certain kind of a say in the policy. For example, talking about abstinence vis-a-vis, providing counseling facilities on gender and sexuality matters within the school. So you find that there is sometimes a dichotomy between the policy, which is not proactively talking about, understanding sexuality and all. So those differences are there, but in a way, they are much ahead of our times, which you see, unlike in India, where, certain basic things we have to still grapple. These topics of sexuality are still a taboo, whereas unlike in the West, they are talked about. Domestic violence is seen as a very serious offense, in the West and in US.
Indeed, sir. Sir, our next question is being posted by Ms. Sarita Kadam. She is asking that acceptance of choice of alternative sexualities by youth at societal level and even at primary level, let's say by their own family and relatives, would be actually contribute towards gender sensitivity and gender inclusivity in India.
Yes, the that acceptance will definitely help a lot, contribute a lot to the, what we talk about diversity, inclusion. Uh, Unfortunately, you find that, many people of different sexual orientation and identity do not get the kind of recognition. They have to still struggle, in their fight to live a life of dignity. And if the near and dear ones, within the family, if they are able to accept first to their individuals, in their family who is of a different orientation, then I think it's a long way. It is going to help, with the other neighboring community and the society at large gradually. It's only when the families provide a source of support and strength, to their near and dear ones, then I think it's an
Agreed, sir.
important step which is needed. Yeah.
Agreed, sir. So in our next question, he's asking that there is hesitation on the side of judiciary to implement laws to secure fundamental rights of women in the private sphere. For instance, criminalization of the marital rape. What can we do about it?
So that's a very thoughtful question, because I find that as on date, I was talking that we have had several progressive legislations, but they largely remain on paper. Uh, Nonetheless, this law on marital rape is a much long overdue. But unfortunately, you find that, it's the mindset of people which is coming in the way for it to be recognized. When the Nirbhaya gang rape incident happened in Delhi in a bus, after that gruesome incident and the death of that girl, you find that Justice Verma Commission was appointed by Government of India to look into existing laws, and Justice Verma was late Justice Verma, was asked to find out what are the existing gaps and, provide recommendations. And Justice Verma had clearly said that please recognize marital rape. But we had a minister of women and child development in the parliament, Maneka Gandhi, telling that in India we do not have marital rape. We do not have that culture. So there was a clearly denial of the reality, whereas, you have so many studies and data to show the prevalence of marital rape happening. So it will take a long, but, deliberation is needed. A continuous dialogue is needed at various levels, on this subject. It will take a while, because, as I said, even the earlier laws on domestic violence, sexual harassment of women at workplace came much later. We are celebrating the 75th year of our independence, but, many of these laws have come much later, including the right to love, uh, the right to same-sex love, and, um, now the struggle is happening for the right to
Yes,
marriage
sir.
and, same-sex marriage and all. So we have a
Yeah,
long way to go. Yeah.
yes, sir. So our next question is by Mr. Abdas Khan. He has three following questions. So I will ask one by one. In his first question, he's asking like, we come from a land where women are worshipped and also abused. We are also living in a dichotomy clearly. What do you think is the reason for this?
So, there is Abdul, a very interesting observation that, you find that either women are worshipped as devis or they are as dasis, on their feet. Never seen women as independent human being, having their own mind, having their own likes and dislikes, so they have their own thoughts and minds as any other human being. So I think that identity of a woman is what they have been yearning for years. I find, that by resorting to mythology, religion, and other things, you sometimes put women on a pedestal, as you said rightly. So perhaps, the male politics, which has been there behind ensuring that men would enjoy all the power and privileges, and they should be controlling women's body, women's sexuality. Over the years, you find that there is systemic oppression happening. So it's not without any design, it's not without ensuring that men would enjoy the benefits and privileges. So I think, because if we realize that how over the years these have been systematically, and just I give this example of a watch, wristwatch. Just as different parts of a watch ensure that the watch is functioning effectively, similarly, all these subsystems, the family, religion, education, judiciary, all these subsystems are working together, hand in hand. They work in tandem, they work together to ensure that the male dominated system continues, you know.
Okay, sir. So in his following question, he's asking it, do you believe we only respect our values and culture only when it is beneficial for us?
Yeah, so when you say us, it's primarily the male who are the ones thinking largely on behalf of the wider society, So, and again, when we say men, it's privileged heterosexual men who want to preserve the patriarchal order. You find people of this particular section are the ones shaping ideas. They are the ones taking policy decisions. They are the ones behind the framing of laws. So I think somewhere we have to ensure that alternate voices also come in, of saner voices, differently thinking men, also should be encouraged and should be brought to the fore. And I think, unfortunately, that is a big gap which is happening.
Yeah, indeed, sir. Then our next question, asked by Miss Bunny, she's asking, do you think India is ready for the same-sex marriage and other rights surrounding it? And also, do you think the Uniform Civil Code will touch upon these aspects?
So, you are right. This question should bother and disturb us that, when we saw the Section 377, there was a judgment decriminalizing homosexuality. So, same sex love has been accepted and talked about. But, beyond that, what are the other civil rights which a same sex person should be able to enjoy, including the right to marriage? So, these should follow logically as a next step. So, and with right to privacy has already been acknowledged and talked about at a wider level. And I think, it's high time that these, including the Uniform Civil Code, also comes into being. But they should be taking into account the consultations, the viewpoints of the marginalized sections of the society. It's only after engaging them into the dialogue and seeking their recommendation and ideas, it's only then the draft legislation for all these should really move ahead, I would say.
Agreed by you, sir. We are done with the Q&A round. Thank you, sir, for answering the question with such an enthusiastic and humble attitude. I would now like to call my co-host, Ms. Harshita Tyagi, to propose the vote of thanks and conclude the session.
Good morning, sir. I, Harsha Tyagi, on behalf of SCM's Praveen Gandhi College of Law, would like to extend my gratitude to our guest, Mr. Harish Sadani, for enlightening us with his exemplary knowledge. Thank you so much, sir, for taking time out of your busy schedule and gracing us with your presence. Thank you for sharing your insights on the importance and intricacies of battling gender stereotypes and making the society more inclusive. It was an absolute honor listening to you. I'd also like to extend my heartiest gratitude to our faculty, Dr. Kavita Rai, for moderating this session. Now, I request my co-hosts, Vaishnavi, Somesh, and Don to please take over. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you